My name is Colleen Kennedy, class of 2009. I was a double major in management, human resources concentration, and theater. And I'm currently a double stag. I'm working on my MBA currently at the business school. So that's kind of my education history. So I am currently the staffing manager at a nonprofit based in Stamford. So I do human resources, onboarding, interviews, training, just a one-woman shop for all of that. And we run academic summer programs for gifted and academically gifted students. So I love working with undergraduates, graduate students, one of my passions. We hire a lot of you all in the summer, so I look at a lot of resumes, do a lot of interviews. So in the coffee house, I'd love to talk about anything like that. You can send me your resume. And I do have an intern opening if you're looking for anything this spring. And so I don't typically do, theater in day-to-day, but I use my theater education in every part of what I do and how I got to where I am now. And we'll probably talk about that more a little bit later. So that's what I do now. Out of college, I joined the Taggart Corporation. I started in their executive team leader management training program. So I worked in this area. I did a lot of training, district training, recruitment, campus recruitment, store management. I got to play Bullseye the dog at a library open, so I did get to use my acting skills once after that. And then I was a financial recruiter in Stamford for a while, so I've definitely can apply the interpersonal things that you learn from your theater to today, and maybe some insight into what the job market's like right now. And that's me, I guess.
Great, thank you. Chris.
I'm Chris Taggart, class of 2005. I was a theater and psychology double major. I'm currently working as a company manager for Disney's Aladdin, the new Broadway production. Upon graduating, during my 4 years at Fairfield, I did summer internships. Now, I didn't really know what a theater manager was, and we can go back to this later, I guess, but,
Talk about it now, go ahead.
Okay, I didn't really know what a theater manager was. I wasn't an accounting major, I wasn't, I'm okay with numbers, I'm not a numbers guy, I was a theater guy. And you'll see this a lot in my industry, I work at Disney's massive, I've only been there for a year and a half. It's about 125 people, which is a huge office. And everyone there is a theater person, or they were a theater person in their life. There's a marketing department, there's an advertising department, there's a finance accounting department. Everyone was a theater person, and they just were like, I just want to work in theater, and okay, sure, I'll do theater accounting, And I kind of, I wasn't good enough to be an actor. I didn't have the patience to be a stage manager, and I didn't have the vision, or the guts to be a director. So I was like, well, what are my skills? Well, I'm good with project management. I'm good with people. I like seeing things go from point A to point B. And when I was in school here, I did internships during my summer, and I did an internship in a box office. I worked at front of house as a house manager. I worked in the marketing department. I worked in the development department, and I was like, okay, this is kind of what I want to do. This is where my skills are best suited. This is how I could be a theater person and still take my skills and be a theater person. Does that make sense? So I graduated and I worked at Manhattan Theater Club, which is a large nonprofit in Manhattan. I started applying to grad schools because I really wanted to focus on theater management. So I ended up going to Columbia to get my MFA in theater management. I graduated in 2010. I also worked while I was there as well. Immediately upon graduating, I was very lucky. I got a job working for Stewart Thompson Productions, which is a general management office. They general manage commercial Broadway shows. And the general manager of a Broadway show, I know some of you have been, I came to Lynn's class, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but a general manager is the one that oversees the entire production from first inception to closing. So all the departments, the tech director, the marketers, the producers, the author, the creative, the cast, the investors, they all come through the general management office. And it's a great place to be because you have your hands in everything. And that's what I like about general management. So I worked for him for 4 years. It was a fairly large office. We general managed some great shows. The biggest one was the Book of Mormon, which was a lot of fun to work on. It was my first project that I started on when it was a workshop, and it was a lot of fun to see it go from there to the Tonys and on. Death of a Salesman, directed by Mike Nichols, and starring Phil Hoffman, was another one. Cat on a Hut Tin Roof with Scarlett Johansson was another show. A lot of great plays.
August Osage County.
August Osage County. I worked there for 4 years, and I decided it was time to move on and try something different. My colleague at Stuart Thompson Productions, he and I left together to go work for Disney. So I've been working for Disney since August 2013. I was hired to be a company manager on Aladdin. So that was a fun project because we took it from we started rehearsals in September 2013. We did an out-of-town tryout in Toronto, and that was for 3 months during the winter. Toronto in the winter, during the holidays, and I left for Toronto 1 week after I got married. It was horrible timing, but it was a good gig, so I had my honeymoon in Toronto. My poor husband. So I've been with that show. I've been with Aladdin ever since, and we opened in March 2014. Tony Awards were in June, and our wonderful Genie won the Tony Award for his performance, and he's fantastic. And right now, we're gearing up for a bunch of international productions. They're going to have Aladdin in Japan, in Germany, in London, Australia, and a US tour over the next 3-4 years. So it's going to be busy.
Thank you. Paul?
I'm Paul Marcarelli, 92, the oldest one on the panel.
I'm older.
Actually, it turns out.
Thank you, Paul.
So I left here in 92, moved to New York, was sure I was going to be an actor. I was an English major here. I predated the minor and even the theater minor here. So I took absolutely every class that I could that the school offered. I think I took 3 of your classes, if I'm not mistaken, at least. Dr. Monaco also directed me in a play here, my only musical to date.
Really?
Yeah, for a reason. I mean, yeah. But then I moved to New York and in '92, and with a couple of friends, one from here and one from my group of theater friends in high school, and we lived in like a studio together, the 3 of us on the floor, and we instantly set out to sort of like make a career for ourselves, and did a lot of auditioning, a lot of studying, and then I think somewhere around like 95, 96, I sort of like found my people, and we started making work together. For the most, I think our first thing was a sketch comedy troupe, and we had a regular gig on Thursday nights at this comedy club, and it was from that I was like, oh, I see, this is how you can make something viable, but you have to make it yourself. And so that really has been kind of my guiding principle throughout my career now, which is really if you want work, you have to make it yourself, or at least you should set out to make it yourself. And there's something sort of about the energy of making stuff happen for yourself that people all of a sudden want to help you. So if you're like, oh, here, come see my show, as opposed to like, what can you do for me? It actually changes the trajectory of your career. And then to sort of make a living and make ends meet, I did commercials for many years. I actually crashed my first commercial casting. I had a lunch date with a friend and who had an audition, and I was just waiting for him, and I saw that they were taking people in 2 at a time, and he had an agent and I didn't. And so I just wrote down his agent on the sign-in sheet. We went in together, and I got the job, and he didn't. The upshot was that it turned out to be this commercial. I made a ton of money off of it, and And from that, I got a commercial agent. And so I started going out right away and started to make a living. So by my mid-20s, I was making a living, a decent living, sporadic but decent. And then that afforded me the opportunity to sort of continue to make my own work. So with a bunch of friends, like-minded friends, I formed a theater company, nonprofit theater company downtown. And unlike Chris, I mean, there wasn't a hope in hell that any of us was going to be able to be business-minded about it. So, of course, you know, it was a bunch of actors figuring out how to run a viable nonprofit business where you actually had to report to the government and a tax office and all these other things. And, but we developed a little niche for ourselves, working with famous living playwrights on plays that, for one reason or another, their agents had deemed not viable. And so, you know, pretty much we discovered that every living playwright has a labor of love project sitting on a shelf collecting dust, and we would give it sort of a respectable production under like an equity-approved showcase. And so we produced the pieces and acted in them, worked with the playwrights to develop the piece and make it stage ready. And then it was sort of like a critic-proof showcase for this, you know, work. And you know, and I was making a little money doing commercials, and I was getting to do my theater at night, and we were building an audience space, and I was like, well, if nothing else happened in my career, this is great. And then, you know, I got this, in 2001, I ended up getting this commercial audition for Verizon. Are you too young to even remember these? The guy.
Did you recognize him? You do.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
I don't recognize you because you are so handsome in person.
Aww.
I'm sorry.
That's very, very nice of you. So it was 2001. I went in for an audition. It was like my second audition after 9/11, where everything just sort of had kind of dropped off. And I think all of us were kind of questioning, why were we doing this? Does it matter? It seems so trivial and pointless. And we were all sort of like, those of us who like really cared about the work we were doing up until that point, everything was life and death, like every, you know, work decision and creative choice you made, you know, and it was like an interesting period of reevaluation. And it just so happened that in the midst of all of this, when I was deciding literally to like go find a farm and raise chickens, I got this job for Verizon. I went in for an audition, didn't know it was going to be a long-term thing, and long story short, I became sort of like face of this company, and still have a contractual relationship with them to this day. And then I'm going to wrap up now, but the way I've been spending the last sort of 6 years of my life is making films as a producer and screenwriter, executive producer. And so I have really been working in independent film for the most part for the last 6 years. And that's really how I'm spending most of my time. And then doing the very rare commercial here or there. And that brings me to today, I guess. Yeah. Those are the broad strokes. Anyway.
Thank you. January.
Hi.
And believe everything she says, because I've seen her on stage and she's amazing.
Oh.
Have you really?
I have.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And not here.
No.
Not here.
Yeah.
So, gosh, yes, I came here and had 4 of the best years of my life. You are in the midst of 4 of the best years of your life. That's not to say that
It just drops
that there
after
won't. Well, it definitely feels that way at first when you leave this, you know, really nurturing place where you can just be who you are, and you're just kind of figuring out who you are, and then the world. So I went to grad school pretty quick. I left here, and it was very interesting. There were some very strong feelings from the faculty about the timeline about when to go to grad school. And I waited 2 years, and that was a really solid decision for me because I needed some time out in the world. And the people who, in my class in grad school, who went straight from undergrad into grad school had a lot of fatigue to overcome. So I left here, and I moved right to New York with some of my roommates and friends, your band of brothers and sisters, and realized I had no idea what to do, and so just asked everyone. I was working in the office at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. Jen and I were sort of laughing when Chris said he went to Manhattan Theatre Club, because we all temped at Manhattan Theatre Club back in the 90s when we graduated. There are just certain things that you find are just sort of available, or people who graduated 5 or 10 years even before you will be like, oh yeah, you can do that thing I did. So I was working at this office, that was a job I passed on to you, and I was working as the Arts and Education Coordinator.
The school time coordinator.
The school time coordinator. It was a non-job. I just knew I had to show up 40 hours a week, and they'd give me a paycheck that paid for some of my rent and some beer.
We would say you need coffee in the morning, beer at night, if you can do that.
Yeah, exactly. So the literary manager was like, why don't you go to grad school? And I was like, okay. I didn't know what else to sort of do. And I had done a non-equity tour. I did the NETC auditions, the theater conference auditions, and I got a lot of really good feedback and some offers to do some non-equity stuff, and I did that, and then it was sort of over after the first summer, and I was like, well, now what? So I lived in New York, and I'm really glad I did that, because I learned things about living on my own outside of a school environment that I definitely needed to know, and helped me once I came out of grad school kind of get my legs under me a little faster than people who hadn't lived in that environment before. So I lived in New York for a year, realized I was gonna start applying to grad school, moved back home with my parents for a year, substitute taught here in Connecticut, and then ended up getting into graduate school at the National Theater Conservatory in Denver, Colorado, which is an amazing program, and it no longer exists. Thank you. #arts funding. I did a 3-year MFA in Denver, was apprenticed to the Denver Center Theater Company, got my equity card, did 8 equity productions while I was in graduate school. And I will tell a little tiny story here. So when I was applying to grad school, I had applied to NYU, Yale, Brown Trinity, just basically every school within a 100-mile radius of right here. And I needed recommendations. And Lynn Porter said to me, nothing, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but she said, nothing would make me happier than to write you a recommendation for grad school, but I absolutely flat out refuse to do it unless you apply to at least one school that is not in the Northeast. And I was like, what? I don't even go here anymore, Lynn. You can't tell me what to do. And Lynn was like, January, you're from here. You know you want to spend the rest of your life in New York. Why don't you just give yourself the opportunity to live in another place? Experience life the way other Americans experience life. Maybe see some different landscapes. And, I met my husband at this place. I fell in love with Colorado. I made all of my professional contact. My life would look very different if I hadn't taken Lynn's advice and applied to that school. So these are smart people. They tell you to wait to go to grad school. They tell you to apply to, and it has, they know what they're talking about. So I went to Denver, and I had a fantastic time, and I moved back, and I had a showcase, and I got an agent, and I was like, that's it! So not it. And I got very lucky, and I started working regionally right away, and booking some, small TV gigs here and there, and waited tables, and cleaned apartments, and temped, and did all that stuff with an MFA for about 6 years. And that's not at all unusual. You find it, if you're passionate about it and it's what you want to do, you have to get right with whatever is going to pay the bills. And paying the bills in New York City, at least, is getting harder and harder by the day. So that's a really good thing to sort of just mentally be prepared for. And if you're prepared for it, no one will ever shame you. We all, have these things about, I'm turning 30 and I'm still doing this, I'm turning 40 and it's very personal. And if you're doing what you're passionate about and paying your rent, honestly, I don't see a problem with that. So then I booked a soap opera because I didn't know it was a contract role because they put the wrong thing on the sign-in sheet, and if I had known it was a contract role, I totally would have blown the audition. But I thought it was for a day, like a one-day thing. And so I booked that, and I ended up being on One Life to Live for about 2 years. And another little tiny anecdote was that my first day on the set, I was standing there and I had been to makeup and I'm in my costume and there's all these cameras and all these people, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. I wonder when I'm gonna get health insurance. I didn't have health insurance when I started working on a soap opera, and it was 6 months later. So I did that for a while, and I really got to do a lot of theater while I was working on the soap, which is also, it's great. It kind of augments when you're making a little bit of money. You really don't need to make a ton of money. You just need to make a little bit of money consistently. And you can really do some great stuff. So I did a lot of off-Broadway theater then, and at that point was when I was doing an August Wilson play at the Signature Theater, and 2 of the guys in the cast were represented by Innovative Artists, which is a really great voiceover department in the city, and they came to see the play. I couldn't get a commercial agent to save my life. And they came to see the play, and they said, who represents you for voiceover? And I said, nobody. And they said, oh, we'll do it. I was like, I spent like 6 years trying to get a voiceover agent. That's how it goes. And so I started working with them, started doing commercials. I've done a bunch of national commercial campaigns, political campaigns, and I've done coming up on about 100 audiobooks, which is sort of the mainstay of my my money job, my career money part, which is really flexible and cool. And now I can travel around and do regional theater. I go to Atlanta, I go to LA, I go to Pittsburgh, and I can hop into a theater or a studio during the day and record and do theater at night, and it works. It's all about diversifying. You gotta figure out everything you can do and do it all joyfully, excitedly. While you're here, learn languages. Learn history. All that stuff is going to come into play. Politics, whatever you're interested in, explore that because it's gonna come back around to you in this business. So that's my pitch, and that sort of brings us up to date.
Last but not least.
Jennifer. So I am the director of the graduate program in educational theater at the City College of New York. We are one of 10 graduate programs in the country that offer a master's degree in educational theater. And so my graduate students are being certified to be theater teachers for the state of New York, or getting a master's in ed theater and going out to be teaching artists. And if you're not familiar with that term, get familiar, because that's where the money is. In New York City, particularly, there are 496 cultural arts organizations that hire teaching artists to go into schools to teach the 5 art forms. New York State particularly has these mandates that say that students have to have a certain number of hours of the art forms, but the schools don't have the budgets to hire full-time teachers, so they hire people to come in and kind of offer them that way. Or the schools with the big budgets have the certified teachers and then still bring in people. So you might work for the Roundabout, Manhattan Theater Club, Disney. You go and do a pre-show, so the class is going to go see Aladdin, and you might go in and do a workshop to get the kids ready to be a good audience. Then you might go afterwards to talk about some of the themes of the show. All the major Broadway houses have education departments, and so that's my game. That's where I work. I'm completing my PhD right now in arts education policy, so I do a lot of work for the state. I've just been asked to sit on a blue ribbon commission, which I think makes me Mr. Shu, right, from Glee, officially. And so I'll be working on that with the state to look at how we actually assess kids and help them graduate in the arts. So how did I get to this whole other world than my colleagues on the panel? I graduated here in '98 and kind of wanted to move to New York, wanted to be an actor, wanted to live that life, but needed a job and needed money to pay the rent. So moved in with my roommate and my friends who had already been there a year before me. And Jan was leaving her job and said, you should come take my job, and I did. And anecdotally, I remember coming in off the train, I was living still here. I had just had an interview at BMCC, at Tribeca Performing Arts Center, for the school time coordinator, as it was called then, and Martha Graham had hired me to be a personal assistant over at Martha Graham, and I was offered a job at another place downtown. What's the theater downtown? Way downtown, like Christopher Street.
The Lucille Hotel.
The Lucille Hotel had offered me a job as well. So I was about 3 months out of graduating, and I had 3 job offers. And I got off the train, and I called Marty, and I said, are you in by any chance? And you were. And I went to your office, and I was like, I don't know, what do I do? What a problem to have. Like,
too many jobs.
Too many choices. I'm so qualified. You did such a good job preparing me, and now I have this dilemma. I don't know, you gave me some sage advice because it set me on the right path, and I took the job at Tribeca Performing Arts Center. I was the school-time coordinator, which in 1998 meant we had shows that came to Tribeca into our little black box, which literally meant I made crossword puzzles that had to do with like the names of the characters in Alice in Wonderland, or I like did cut and paste pictures of the characters in the play. It was really awful. But I knew then that, okay, there's something here, and I started to just talk to some different people, and they said, you should come to this conference, you should meet this person, and it kind of opened up this world of what arts education was, and I realized the work I was doing at Tribeca was not quality arts education, but that I was really interested in what that was and what that meant. Simultaneously, I also had done NETCs, and I was also kind of pursuing the theater path, but wasn't getting any acting offers, but I was getting a lot of directing and choreographing offers. That was kind of where my artistry was, and always had been. My mom runs a children's theater company. I've been directing kids since I was 14, and I've been choreographing all their shows, and those were the offers I was getting. So again, you go where the money and the jobs are, and I was loving it. I was loving still being an artist. I realized very quickly that my artistry, I didn't need to be on the stage. I just loved being part of a production. I loved watching a production go up. I loved choreographing. I loved working with people. I loved helping them get to that through that process. I loved being a director. And it worked with me and kids. So that was my path. So those kind of two worlds were converging in New York City, and I started getting a lot of jobs out of the city. I went and worked at North Shore Music Theater. I worked at a lot of places here in Connecticut. I worked at a lot of places in the tri-state area, and just kept getting a lot of work working with kids. Then I got a full-time job as a theater teacher in Brooklyn, teaching 6th, 7th, and 8th grade in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, which is a pretty tough neighborhood, and realized very quickly that, and that was it. I had just been choreographing for like summer camps. And they hired me to be the full-time theater teacher in a public school 5 days a week, and I realized I knew nothing, that was a lot more responsibility than I had any qualifications for. So I stayed for 2 years, and then decided I needed some advanced degree and got a master's in educational theater. And as a grad student, realized I couldn't work full-time as a theater teacher and be in grad school, so I became a teaching artist. And I worked for the New Victory, I worked for MTC, I worked for the Guggenheim, I worked for Arts Connection, I worked for Disney. I got to go back kind of into that world and see theater through the educational outreach component and through their eyes. And I worked there for 2 years, started to do some professional developments, and Ryan, one of our colleagues, sent me this email.
I know Ryan McKinney. Some of them do.
So McKinney,
he directs for us on occasion.
Your director, McKinney,
Yes.
forwards me an email one night and says, you might be interested in this, and it says City College is starting a program, and it says lecturer. So CUNY has this thing called lecturers. It's actually junior faculty, but it says lecturer. So I think it's like a one-time, it's like a, maybe an adjunct position, but it's probably just like a guest class. So I'm very confident. I send them my resume, I send them everything, because I think I can do a guest class. And I continue on through the process, and it's only when I'm down to like 5 of us that I realize they are hiring me to start the only graduate program in educational theater in a public university. And when I started 8 years ago, there were only 6 in the country. There are now 10 in the country, 3 of which were modeled after my program. So yeah, it's a pretty big deal. So again, I was only just wildly, overly confident in that, and they took a chance on me, and it has paid off tremendously. And now we've got about 85 students, and from there, I get to work with like really cool theater companies. I partner with the Roundabout with their education program. I consult for Disney Education. I work for the DOE. I do a lot of professional developments. I get to
Department of
Education,
New York State,
New York City, the national DOE. I work a lot in DC. I work a lot with Americans for the Arts. I work for I'm right now in the process of getting on the board of directors for the American Alliance of Theater Educators. I go to a lot of conferences, I sit on a lot of panels, I do a lot of talks. So it's kind of like a whole other world. I teach, I'm a professor, so I get to teach my grad students. And my program partners with a K-8 school. We've kind of adopted them. They had no theater programming 5 years ago, and now we service the entire K-8 for their theater program for their school. So I direct the middle school productions. We do all Disney productions. And hopefully we're doing Lion King in the fall. And so we are building theater in the Harlem community, so I do a lot of like theater through community work. I get to do everything. And it's really fantastic. That's what I have to say.
Great.